Chrysler's own engineers wanted to recall the 426 Street Hemi after the first year of production. The engine was so violent, so unpredictable, and so dangerous in the hands of ordinary drivers that Chrysler's legal department seriously considered pulling it from dealerships. This is the story of the most legendary muscle car engine ever built, and why the company that created it almost killed it before it became a legend. February 1964. Daytona International Speedway. Chrysler showed up to NASCAR's biggest race with something nobody had seen before. They called it the 426 Hemi, and it didn't just win the Daytona 500. It took first, second, and third place. Richard Petty crossed the finish line a full lap ahead of the nearest Ford. The racing world had never seen domination like this. Bill France banned the engine 2 weeks later. Too powerful, he said. Not production-based, he claimed. Chrysler pulled out of NASCAR entirely in protest. But here's the thing about building an engine so dominant that racing bans it. You can't just put that back in the box. Chrysler had created a monster, and every performance car buyer in America wanted one. Chrysler faced a problem in 1965. They'd built the ultimate racing engine, gotten it banned from racing, and now had thousands of customers demanding to buy it. The 426 Race Hemi made 425 horsepower with a single 4-barrel carburetor and could be pushed past 600 horsepower with racing modifications. It was a purpose-built competition engine that had no business being in a street car, so Chrysler did what any rational company would do. They detuned it, softened the camshaft, added a second carburetor for drivability, and offered it to the public as a regular production option. They called it the Street Hemi, set the price at $907.60, and figured maybe a few hundred people would actually order one. They were catastrophically wrong about that. The 426 Street Hemi that arrived in 1966 was everything the racing version promised and nothing any normal driver expected. Chrysler rated it at 425 horsepower, which was probably 50 horsepower low. The engine ran dual Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors feeding hemispherical combustion chambers through massive intake ports. Compression sat at 10.25 to 1. The camshaft was aggressive enough that the engine barely idled below 1,000 RPM. But those were just numbers. What the numbers didn't capture was how the engine delivered that power. Modern engines build power gradually. You press the throttle, the revs climb, acceleration increases in a predictable curve. The Street Hemi didn't work like that. Below 3,000 RPM, it felt sluggish, almost lazy. You'd wonder what the fuss was about. Then you'd hit 3,500 RPM and everything changed. The engine didn't accelerate, it detonated. The rear tires would break loose even in third gear. The front end would lift. The steering wheel would try to tear itself out of your hands. Drivers who'd never experienced serious horsepower would panic and lift off the throttle, which made the car swap ends as the weight transferred forward and the rear tires suddenly found grip. Chrysler dealers started reporting accidents within weeks of the first deliveries. The problem wasn't just the power. The problem was that Chrysler made the Street Hemi available in everything. You could order a Hemi in a Plymouth Belvedere, a Dodge Coronet, a Plymouth Roadrunner, a Dodge Charger. These weren't sophisticated sports cars with advanced suspensions and wide tires. These were basic intermediate sedans with leaf springs, drum brakes, and bias ply tires designed for grocery runs. A base model Plymouth Belvedere weighed about 3,500 pounds and came with a 318 cubic inch V8 making 230 horsepower. That was adequate for normal driving. Reasonable. Safe. Then somebody would check the Hemi option box, and suddenly that same basic sedan had 425 horsepower trying to overwhelm tires that were 6 inches wide. The physics didn't work. The suspension couldn't handle the torque, the brakes couldn't handle the speed, the tires couldn't handle the acceleration. But Chrysler would sell you one anyway, because in 1966, if you wanted a Hemi bad enough to pay for it, they figured you could handle the consequences. most insurance companies noticed the Hemi problem before Chrysler's lawyers did. By late 1966, major insurers started refusing to cover Hemi-powered cars for drivers under 25. Some wouldn't insure them at all. The accident rates were that bad. Young drivers would buy a Hemi Charger, take it out on Saturday night, and end up wrapped around a telephone pole by Sunday morning. Chrysler's legal department started seeing the lawsuits pile up. Wrongful death claims, personal injury suits, property damage. Every lawsuit claimed the same thing. Chrysler had put a racing engine in a street car without adequate warnings about its power and handling characteristics. The lawyers had a point. Chrysler's marketing emphasized the Hemi's power and performance. Nobody mentioned that ordinary drivers couldn't control it. Internal memos from late 1966 show Chrysler executives discussing a recall, not because the engine was mechanically defective, because it was too powerful for the cars it was installed in and too dangerous for average drivers to operate safely. The Street Hemi worked exactly as designed. That was the problem. 3 things saved the Street Hemi from being recalled. First, the insurance industry solved part of Chrysler's problem by making Hemi cars essentially uninsurable for high-risk drivers. If young drivers couldn't get insurance, they couldn't buy the cars, which reduced accident rates. Second, Chrysler started requiring dealers to have serious conversations with Hemi buyers. Not official policy, but strongly encouraged. Dealers would explain that the Hemi required constant maintenance, drank fuel like a drunk sailor, and needed an experienced driver to handle safely. Some dealers refused to sell Hemis to obviously inexperienced buyers. Third, and most importantly, the people who actually bought Hemis and kept them didn't want recalls or restrictions. These were serious performance enthusiasts who understood what they were getting. They wanted the most powerful engine available, accepted the risks, and handled the maintenance requirements. The accident rates among experienced Hemi owners were actually quite low. So Chrysler made a decision. They kept building Street Hemis, but they stopped marketing them to average buyers. The Hemi became something you had to seek out, something you had to specifically request. No more magazine ads showing everyday people driving Hemi cars. No more dealership promotions pushing the Hemi option. If you wanted one, you could have one, but Chrysler wasn't going to encourage it. The Street Hemi's reputation only grew more legendary as production continued through 1971. Chrysler built approximately 11,000 Street Hemi engines across all models during that 7-year run. That's nothing. For comparison, Chevrolet built over 100,000 LS6 454 engines in just 2 years. The Hemi was always rare, always expensive, and always intimidating. The scarcity wasn't entirely intentional. The Hemi cost significantly more to build than Chrysler's other big block engines. Each cylinder head required extensive machining. The valve train used exotic materials. Assembly took longer and required skilled workers. Chrysler lost money on every Hemi they sold, even at the premium price. But they kept building them because the Hemi's reputation sold other cars. People would come into Dodge and Plymouth dealerships wanting to see the Hemi car, then buy a more reasonable 383 or 440 powered model instead. The Hemi was the ultimate halo engine. Its existence made everything else Chrysler built seem more exciting. By 1971, the Street Hemi's days were numbered. Insurance costs had skyrocketed. Emissions regulations were tightening. Gas prices were rising. And Chrysler's accountants finally convinced management that losing money on every Hemi built didn't make business sense anymore. The last Street Hemi rolled off the production line in December 1971, and an era ended. What Chrysler didn't realize was that killing the Street Hemi would make it immortal. The engine that was too powerful, too expensive, and too dangerous became the most sought-after power plant in muscle car history. Today, a numbers-matching Hemi car can bring 7 figures at auction. Even a basic Plymouth Roadrunner with a Hemi sells for more than a comparable Superbird or a Boss 429 Mustang. The 426 Street Hemi represents everything wild and uncompromising about the muscle car era. An engine so powerful that the company that built it almost recalled it. An engine that insurance companies refused to cover. An engine that required skill and respect to operate safely. Modern engines make more power with better reliability and perfect drivability. But no modern engine has the Street Hemi's reputation. That's because the Street Hemi was never just about horsepower numbers. It was about having something genuinely dangerous, something that required commitment and skill to master. It was about Chrysler building the most powerful engine they could and selling it to anyone brave enough or crazy enough to want one. The engineers who wanted to recall it were probably right. The Street Hemi was too much engine for most drivers. It was violent, unpredictable, and occasionally lethal. But the people who could handle it, who respected its power and learned to control it, they got to experience something that doesn't exist anymore. Pure, unfiltered, utterly uncompromising American muscle. That's why the Street Hemi became a legend. Not despite being too dangerous, because of it.